Hey everyone, what's going on? It's Mr. Harvey. Let's continue our lecture. We are on chapter 14, and we're going to finish chapter 14 today by talking about Russian reform and developments in British democracy during the mid to late 1800s. And we're going to start first by talking about Russian reform during this time. So we're going to be talking today and focusing on the Tsar Alexander II, ladies and gentlemen, and talking about some major reforms that he's going to try to implement within Russia and ultimately be very unsuccessful in doing so. But let's kind of talk a little bit about before I start talking about Alexander II, kind of the state of Russia. All right, Russia has lost within the Crimean Wars that aura of invincibility within their armies that was kind of cultivated during the times of the Napoleonic Wars, and then Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia is gone, and Russia is behind, and we know this, ladies and gentlemen. We've been talking about this for the majority of our class, and that Russia is behind socially, economically, intellectually, politically. They are behind. The Industrial Revolution is going on in Western Europe. Britain has been involved within the Industrial Revolution since the late 1700s. It really hasn't even started in Russia, okay? And so Russia is behind. We know this, all right? And Alexander II understands this. And kind of where I'm getting at with this, ladies and gentlemen, is Alexander II understands that Russia is at a crossroads. Either Russia can kind of get on track and kind of regain its power within Europe and modernize, or we're going to see some instability, or Russia can go down the path of instability and revolution. And that's where Russia is going to be going. It's going to be a little bit too late for some major changes. And when Alexander II tries to make some of these major changes, they're going to fail. And what I'm kind of foreshadowing the coming revolutions that we're going to be seeing with Russia, okay? And eventually the revolution that's really important, the uprising, is the communist revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union. So that's kind of where we're getting at. But Alexander II, ladies and gentlemen, understands that Russia needs to change, and he's going to try to implement some major changes during the 19th century. And so Russia will change. And the big change that he's going to try to implement, ladies and gentlemen, is getting rid of serfdom. Russia still has serfs. Austria does not. Prussia does not. Much of Eastern Europe does not have it anymore, ladies and gentlemen, but Russia does. And he's going to fumble this big time, and we're going to talk about that. But he understands that Russia needs to change, and this is one of the changes that he can make to try to get Russia back on track within kind of with the other European powers, with Prussia, or now a united Germany, with France, and most notably with Great Britain. So really important, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to try to make some changes, and one of the big changes is getting rid of serfdom. But he's going to kind of mess that up. But we're going to see in response to some of these changes that he makes, he's going to be very unpopular. We're going to see a rise of radicalism, kind of foreshadowing the rise of communism and repression within Russia. But let's talk about Alexander II a little bit. Okay, this is Nicholas the First's son, and he was very well prepared to rule. He was smart, and he understood. He had a great pulse on what was going on within Russia and Russia's place within Europe and the world. And he understood that there needed to be change. Now he's going to try to become this great reformer like Peter. He's often compared to Peter, but he's going to fail. Alexander II he's going to try to make a lot of changes, and he will. But he's going to kind of fumble some of these changes, and it's going to lead to a lot of unpopularity, and eventually he's going to be assassinated and murdered. But he's very motivated to change after the debacle of the Crimean War, very motivated to change because he kind of understands where Russia's at within the context of Europe, and so he's going to make some changes. And the big change that he's going to make but kind of mess up is the abolition of serfdom. Okay, he understood that serfdom really represented a gap between Russia and the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe doesn't have serfdom. Russia still has it, and Alexander understands that this, the rest of Europe is industrializing. Alexander doesn't see that within Russia, and he's going to be trying to make some changes to catch them up. Well, serfdom is one of them, and he's going to mess this up, and we'll talk about how he messes that up. But in 1861, Russia gets rid of serfdom. And he understood that serfdom was very economically inefficient, The serfs were always kind of a threat to revolt due to the terrible conditions and just the inequity for the serfs. And also, when it came to the serfs in the military, they didn't perform very well in battle. And that makes sense. They're pretty much slaves within Russia fighting for their country. There's not a lot of incentive to fight for their country, and really defend their country when their country treats them so badly. And so Alexander II is going to abolish serfdom. All right. Now let's talk about some of the positives within this. Okay. Number one is serfs immediately are going to gain rights to marry without permission. They can buy and sell land. They can sue in courts, and they're going to start to be allowed to involve themselves within the judicial process. They can pursue different trades, different crafts. But here's the big problem with the freedom of the serfs, the emancipation of the serfs. This is really where Alexander II messes up. And it's over almost a 50-year period. The serfs are mandated. They have to pay back, including interest, ladies and gentlemen, their landlords in order to receive land. So before they're fully free, before they are fully allowed to kind of go off, they have to pay back their landlords in order to receive any land. So the serfs are going to be so upset about this because it's almost like they're not allowed to be serfs for another 50 years until they pay back all their landlords. This is really going to hurt the process. The serfs are going to be like, wait, what? We're not free yet? We have to pay all this money back? With what money do we have? This is not a good situation, and this kind of really represents a failure of Alexander II to truly free the serfs. And the procedures are going to be so complicated. This process is going to be so complicated. The payments so complicated that many serfs believe that they were still slaves, and in a sense, they still pretty much were. And that real emancipation was still to come. And the government's going to be forced to cancel all remaining repayments after Russia is defeated by the Japanese in 1905, because there's going to be some revolution stirring. And so the Tsar, Alexander II, the government really fumbles, really messes up this emancipation of the serfs. Okay, it's very complicated, and these payments are really just going to be such a burden on the serfs, and they're really not going to be truly free until they make these payments. And so the serfs are really not going to view this freedom by Alexander II in a positive light. Okay, let's continue. The abolition of serfdom, ladies and gentlemen, is also going to require a major reorganization of local government and the judicial system. Okay, we're going to start to see the importance of village communes, the importance of the village and that's going to start to replace the authority of local governments over serfs. We're going to see the importance of village elders. They're going to start settling disputes and collect taxes. But what's really important is the nobles. What is Alexander II going to do with the nobles? If we remember, the nobles in the East have a lot more political power than the nobles in the West. Really important for us, ladies and gentlemen. And so, we've seen with the Table of Ranks with Peter the Great, the Charter of Nobility with Catherine the Great, is the monarchy always kind of having to negotiate with the nobility. Okay, having to have that relationship. And the traditional relationship has been when the monarchy needs something, they gave the nobles greater power over the serfs. Well, now Alexander II is pulling the plug on that. He is saying, nobles, we're going to take the serfs away from you. Well, the nobles are going to want something in return. And this is what Alexander II is going to do. He's going to give the nobility a greater role in local government through these zemstvos. It's a system of councils, provincial and county councils. They're going to be overseeing local projects like bridges, road repair, education. It's going to be the system is going to be very ineffective, but Alexander II is going to have to give the nobles something in order to not have a full-on revolution on his hands with the nobility. And so he's going to give them a greater role within local government. Now, we're also going to see at this time another change that we're going to see within Alexander II is judicial reform. And we're going to start to see some Enlightenment ideals be introduced in Russia when it comes to law, legal methodology, okay, such as equality before the law, the notion of impartial hearings, uniform procedures, judicial independence, a trial by jury. Okay, now when Russia introduces some of these and Alexander introduces some of these ideals into Russia, it's going to be very far from perfect. We're not going to see, all of these new ideas be implemented, perfectly. But it was a start. And so we're seeing some major changes in Russia. But we can already see, like I've explained, Alexander II is kind of not implementing these changes in the best way. All right. Another big reform is we're going to see military reform. He's going to, we're going to see service requirements be lowered from 25 to 15 years, a 10-year change that we see from the traditional service requirements, so 25 years to 15 years, and they're going to be some relax a little bit of the discipline within the army. But these changes, ladies and gentlemen, are not going to be truly effective and helpful for Alexander and Russia. All right. Now we're going to see some repression in Poland. We're going to see some Polish nationalism, very similar to the Polish uprising of 1830, and Alexander is going to free the Polish serfs. Okay. But he's going to continue to try to oppress Poland and Russify Poland, aka in Poland they have to learn the Russian law, Russian language, okay, and really bring in the Russian culture into Poland. And Alexander, but the big idea that I'm trying for y'all to get at is that Alexander's changes did not have the effect that he intended. He thought that he would be considered the Tsar liberator, very popular. The monarchy would have a lot of popularity from the common people. It's not going to really have that effect. And he's actually going to be very unpopular. The nobles want more involvement in the government. The serfs thought emancipation was too slow. And he's going to be very unpopular, ladies and gentlemen. And there's going to be assassinations on his life. And he's going to be very close-minded with these assassinations, these assassination attempts. And eventually he will be assassinated and killed. And so we're going to see after someone tries to kill him, after a group tries to kill him, Russia's going to become more of a police state. There's going to be radicalism, instability. It's going to lead to more repression in Russia. And we're going to start to see this instability within Russia, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be kind of lingering and eventually really come to fruition within the communist revolution that we're going to be seeing in World War I. All right. Alexander is going to have a lot of critics. They're going to target his regime. We're going to see Alexander Herzen. He's going to start a movement called populism based on the communal life of peasants, and he wanted the radicals to live with the peasants, to teach them their role in a coming revolution, kind of foreshadowing a communist revolution. But this is going to fail as the peasants are just simply going to turn these revolutionaries into the police. But we're going to see revolutionaries target the Tsar and his government violently. We're going to see Vera Zashilich attempt to assassinate the military governor of St. Petersburg. And we're going to see eventually the People's Will, a radical group, assassinate Alexander II in March of 1881. And after Alexander II is killed, we're going to see Alexander III take over, who's going to be very repressive, roll back much of his dad's reforms. He's going to strengthen the secret police, increase censorship of the press, and eventually Alexander III, his son, will be Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. And so what I'm trying to get at, ladies and gentlemen, is the instability of Russia, the failure of the monarchy. It is failing big time. Alexander II kind of has this last attempt to make some major reforms. They're not working out. Russia is behind, unstable. We're going to see it enter World War I in a very weak state, and eventually we will see the revolution, the communist revolution led by Lenin, take over, and Russia will no longer cease to exist, and we will see a Soviet Union rise. Important for us. Okay, and here is a kind of artist rendering of the explosion, the killing of Alexander II, the murder of him. He was assassinated. An assassin threw a bomb at him, and this is a building that kind of marks. This is where he was killed in Russia. I was there. well, not there for the assassination, but I went to visit the site in St. Petersburg, and this is a picture of the spot, this landmark of where he was assassinated. All right. So let's talk about some developments within Great Britain. We're going to shift gears. So we're kind of going from the country that is unstable, very behind, to kind of the pinnacle of Europe, and that's the British. They are industrialized. They have democracy. They are a very advanced civilization, and they have the British Empire. And we haven't quite talked about the British Empire just yet. We will be talking about imperialism and the British Empire, but we have, the country that we just talked about, the country that was very behind in so many different aspects, politically, economically, socially. Now we're talking about Great Britain, which is on the opposite end of that spectrum. They are ahead. They are this liberal bastion of the world, of democracy. Like I said, industrialized, very powerful, okay? The British, all right? In Great Britain during the 19th century symbolized a very confident, powerful, liberal state. And I want to focus on politics at the end of this lecture with Great Britain. They were not fearful of revolution. Why? Well, they were able to deal with any of their problems through Parliament. And we've seen that, right? The Great Reform Bill, the Factory Acts, the Mines Acts, they are taking care of business, handling their business through Parliament. If they see a problem, they're going to handle it with Parliament, with reform. Okay, and they're going to be winning the workers over even more. All right, and we're going to see two kind of really important prime ministers, really important politicians in Disraeli and Gladstone is who we're going to be focusing on. Okay, and important for us to remember some of the important prime ministers, right? Sir Robert Walpole, that kind of first considered prime minister. Okay. We've talked a little bit about Earl Grey, very important for us. Disraeli and Gladstone are important politicians for us to remember, okay? Now, Disraeli is going to be conservative, okay? Now, Lord Derby is going to be the prime minister during this time, but Disraeli is going to eventually be the prime minister and a really important conservative politician. Eventually, he's going to be a prime minister, okay? And they're going to introduce in 1867 a new reform bill. Let's talk about it, okay? It's going to expand the number of voters, okay, from about 1.4 million to 2.4 million. All right, ignore women. It's going to ignore women, but we are going to be talking a little bit about the suffrage movement for women, which is going to be very important for us. But Disraeli is going to gain a lot of workers' support and a lot of people's support by simply expanding the right to vote. Obviously, that's going to play well into the hands of people who get the right to vote now. So that's going to be very important, expanding the electorate, which we saw, ladies and gentlemen, with that Great Reform Bill, right? Very important for us. That was one of the things that Earl Grey did, expanding the number of voters, all right? And Disraeli what's important about Disraeli that I want to focus on, ladies and gentlemen, is that he was very similar to OVB, very similar to Bismarck, is that even though Bismarck does not believe in democracy, Bismarck is, a monarchist, he supports the monarchy. Bismarck is very conservative. Disraeli is very conservative as well. And so both of them believed that they could use their conservatism, okay? And they could get things done in a conservative way for conservatism in their own respective countries to maintain power, okay? So Disraeli thought that he could use democracy. He could use that some things were inevitable, much like OVB believed that unification was inevitable. So he's going to kind of, OVB facilitate unification in a conservative methodology. Disraeli is going to do the same thing. He understands that change is inevitable. Workers need this. People want this. Why not have conservatives take the credit for it? Even if some of these things are a little liberal, but this will allow conservatives to stay in power. Okay, so Disraeli thought it was very smart to get on the sides of the workers and that reform, just like OVB, was inevitable, so why not have the conservatives take credit for it? And that's what's important. That's the similarity between Disraeli and OVB, is they're going to try to maintain their notion of conservatism in their respective countries by reforming in the name of conservatism. And it's going to be a little hypocritical in the notion because, and I'll talk about OVB and Disraeli in a little bit, but some of these reforms that Disraeli and OVB will be making are actually a little liberal, but it's to maintain their power. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Gladstone. okay? We're going to see in 1868 William Gladstone elected as prime minister, all right? And so the Whigs, and I had talked about the Tories and the Whigs are going to be the Liberal Party, okay? And William Gladstone is the ideological opposite of Disraeli. He's a liberal, all right? So important for us. Gladstone was liberal. Disraeli was conservative, and we should know that, all right? Gladstone is going to support free trade, repealing the Corn Laws, lower taxes, and he is going to, this is a huge attack on conservatism, he's going to make institutions that had been traditionally, remain traditionally to preserve the aristocracy, the Anglican Church, be open to all classes and all religions. So attacking the aristocracy, attacking established churches. Remember, if we go back to the ancient regime, right, a powerful aristocracy, a powerful religious institutions, that's kind of a staple of conservatism. Well, Gladstone is liberal, and he's going to go after some of these older institutions and make them open to all classes and religions. He's going to institute some Enlightenment reforms, because we know that liberalism is a staple, Enlightenment is a staple of liberalism, like freedom of religion, freedom of class, okay? Being able to become an aristocrat, being able to become part of the bourgeoisie, okay? Competitive exams, a kind of a meritocracy to replace patronage for civil service. You can't buy a military commission based on your name. You need to earn it, a meritocracy. So some important Enlightenment ideals within Gladstone's tenure. All right. He's also going to institute voting by secret ballot. So you won't be persecuted for who you vote by. So your ballot is confidential only to you. All right, so you don't have any pressure, or people can't see how you vote or whatnot. And really important thing that Gladstone is going to reform is the Education Act of 1870, which established that the government, not the church, is going to run elementary schools. And what we're going to start to see, ladies and gentlemen, rise out of the Industrial Revolution is compulsory education, that you have to go to school. And we're seeing the government take that over, a secular institution as opposed to a religious institution. Very important. Okay, let's continue. Now, Disraeli and Gladstone are going to kind of go back and forth and make these huge changes for us, ladies and gentlemen, but it kind of in the name of their respective ideologies and parties. Okay, Disraeli is the founder of modern British conservatism. The Tories, like I said before with the Whigs, the Tories are going to be turning into the Conservative Party, and we're going to see Disraeli pass, very significant social legislation to benefit the working class. And some of these ideas are actually very liberal, but Disraeli is going to do this in order to get the workers on his side. And so the workers will be supporting conservatives. All right, very important for us. And this is something that's huge, is the Public Health Act of 1875. And this is to reaffirm the duty of the state to interfere with private property to protect health and physical well-being. All right, very important for us. So, and this is what we're going to be seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is Disraeli, and we'll see OVB do the same thing, is they're going to actually start to provide health care for people. All right, we'll talk about that. Health care, very important. We're going to start to see governments providing health care for people, and that's a very liberal idea. That is not a conservative idea, but getting the workers on their side. Another thing that Disraeli is going to do is the Artisan Dwelling Act of 1875. The government becomes actively involved in providing housing for the working class. So housing reform, giving housing for people. Man, it's a very socialized, kind of socialism type of notion from a conservative. What? Really? Well, Disraeli's trying to get the workers on his side. And so he understands that reform is inevitable. So why not have the conservatives take credit for it? That's a very social and socialism ideology of a lot of government interference. Whoa, government taking control of a major means of the economy, housing. Whoa, all right. Disraeli understands. Okay, so he's dabbling in. OVB is going to be very similar, and they're very comparable. Disraeli and both OVB in their respective countries are going to dabble a little bit in liberalism and socialism, or in the name of conservatism, in order to get people on the conservative side. All right, very important for us. All right. We're going to see Disraeli allow for the protection of trade unions and the allowance of picket lines, again, to get the workers on the conservative side within Great Britain. Very important. And this is kind of Disraeli and Gladstone going back and forth in Parliament. And they were two very, very important figures within Parliament during this time. Now, the big question, ladies and gentlemen, and this is going to be really important, is what to do with Ireland. All right, this is called the Irish question during the late 1800s, and it's also going to go and spill over into the 1900s as well. Okay, Gladstone, okay, he's going to be prime minister again in 1880, has to deal with the Irish wanting home rule, aka nationalism. The Irish want their own country. Okay, and the Irish want control of their local government as opposed to English, but eventually Irish nationalism. The Irish want their own country. And so Gladstone, this is going to be a big deal for Great Britain, what to do with Ireland. And he helped address Irish home rule through two major pieces of legislation. One is that Irish Catholics no longer had to pay for the Anglican Church in Ireland, the Church of Ireland. And that's a big change. Irish Catholics are Roman Catholic. The Anglican Church in Ireland is Protestant, and forcing the Catholics to pay for a Protestant church made them mad. Okay. Also, compensating for Irish tenants who had been evicted from their land within the agricultural revolution, within industrialism, to help Irish workers, farmers have some money. Okay, very important. Charles Parnell is going to be a leader of the Irish movement for home rule, and we're going to see home rule, which is supported by Gladstone, split the Liberal Party and be defeated over and over and over again. But we're going to see kind of this issue linger, because Great Britain eventually is going to kind of, have to push this issue to the side once World War I blows up and the tensions with Germany. And so we'll kind of see home rule, this notion, kind of spill over in the post-war period of the 1920s and 1930s. But this is a big deal, ladies and gentlemen, for Great Britain of what to do with Ireland. All right, very important for us. Gladstone is going to pass legislation that supports tenant farmers in Ireland. And Ireland is going to become a nation of tenant farmers, and farming is going to be a very important industry within Ireland. But the inability to solve the Ireland question is going to harm other domestic problems, as conservatives and liberals are not going to be able to compromise, and we're going to eventually see the creation of the Labour Party within Great Britain. But this kind of, I don't want everyone to kind of get convoluted in the details here. This issue of Ireland is going to be, a thorn in the side of Great Britain. They're not necessarily going to know what to do with that, because there's other huge issues that are going to be starting to be arising, and most notably is the rise of Germany, the tensions that are going to eventually lead to the outbreak of World War I, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? All right, we're going to stop there for today. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a fantastic day, and we're going to start Chapter 15 soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.